Hello, everyone, and welcome. Very, very excited to have you all here today. We are here to discuss AI. No big secret there. It's been a very hot topic, I think, for everybody in the recruiting space and probably everyone worldwide professionally in any capacity, right? But very, very fortunate today to be co-hosting this webinar. Talent Collective and Metaview are co-hosting this, and we have a very, very special speaker here today, CEO and co-founder of Metaview. Metaview is a recruiting platform that takes notes for you. I have actually been very fortunate to be using it these past few weeks, and it's amazing because I can just sit back and actually enjoy my conversation with the candidate and actively listen instead of feverishly taking notes. So really, really grateful for Metaview and for Siadhal Magos to be here with us today. Very excited to be here and to see what we have in store. So as everyone is entering, please introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your LinkedIn profile if you'd like, and there is going to be a Q&A at the end. So please feel free to put any questions that pop up for you in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. Just a real quick brief intro on Talent Collective for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a community for women and those who identify as women in the talent acquisition space. So if you're at all interested, we have in-person events and we do a lot of virtual programming just like this. So again, huge thank you for Siadhal Magos for being here with Metaview. Would love to do just a brief intro and hear more about you. But generally speaking, I think he needs no introduction these days. I've seen him on so many webinars and all over LinkedIn. We're excited to hear from you today and going to pass it over to you now.
Nice. Thanks so much, Krista. Yeah, good to meet you all, folks, and thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully this session is thought-provoking at the very least. I think it's an incredible time, as Krista mentioned, in all industries to sort of start to think through and piece together almost your own personal perspective. I'm sure you're already starting, but your own personal perspective on how AI is going to affect your work and your workflow and maybe even sort of your career further downstream. And that's really the focus of this talk that I want to give, which is a few frameworks or a few almost thoughts to throw out there that maybe get the conversation going around how AI might impact recruiting. And spoiler alert, I guess two things that are important. One, I'm very much an AI optimist, so you'll see that sort of come through in how I think about things. And two, most importantly, I'm especially an AI optimist for the recruiting space. And I think there's a whole bunch of very fundamental reasons for why AI is going to be a great thing for recruiting that, yeah, I'm going to dive into during this. Krista, I realized I made an error. We said we were going to jump on early and do a quick tech check just to make sure the presentation was working properly. And I realized we didn't do that. So now I'm going to share my screen, but hopefully it's sharing the right thing. Let's see if that goes okay. So yeah, Krista, I'm going to lean on you. You can tell me when I go into presentation mode if you're seeing no, you're seeing the wrong screen. It looks
Yeah,
like,
I see the next slide there on the right.
Yeah, okay. Let me see if I can get this right. Okay, so, okay, second. Okay, so I think I should be able to do it now. You can tell I work in tech, right?
It's always so nerve-wracking when you're like, on video, trying to get the right slide up. Here we go. We're on. You're good to go now.
Nice, great, awesome. So yeah, we'll dive straight in. Please do feel free to funnel your questions into the chat. If there's something that really, hey, you want to stop me in my tracks and ask the question, then I can't see you right now, but I can hear you. So feel free to do that too. Keen to make this a conversation, but equally, if it makes sense to leave this sort of jamming on the topic to the end, we can do that too. So first of all, as Krista mentioned, I'm Siadhal. I'm one of the co-founders at a company called Metaview. And I want to talk today about why I believe, and we believe as a company, that AI will actually save recruitment. And we'll unpack what that means. So what Metaview is we started Metaview back in 2018 with a mission to build the AI co-pilot for hiring. we have a really special focus on leveraging AI to help recruiters save time and have better conversations with candidates. We actually have a very specific belief that these conversations, interviews or prep calls or offer calls, whatever they may be, are really the most important part of the hiring process. And the fact that they've historically been so unreliable and often quite arduous is a really big problem. So obviously we've been working on this problem for a while, since 2018, as I mentioned. And Krista mentioned, she's seen a lot about Metaview recently. Maybe didn't hear so much about us in 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. It's really been in the last year that a lot of people have got very interested in what we're doing, and B, frankly, our product has gone to the next level because of these broader changes in the AI ecosystem. So all of the same things that you're seeing on the news and the tech press for the last year around AI are the same things that have really affected our business as well. And our ability to solve some of the problems we set out to has just accelerated massively because of this. We work with some amazing customers, companies like Brex, Robinhood, AngelList, Pure Storage, hundreds and hundreds of others, from big tech companies to sort of big enterprises to smaller boutique search firms or growth stage startups as well. Really, it spans the gamut because the problem that we're solving is pretty universal for recruiters. So as I mentioned, you can definitely color me as an AI optimist. And I wanted to share my perspective on what I think AI is going to mean for us all in recruiting. So Krista mentioned how, of course, this isn't just a recruiting thing, right? There's lots of talk across industries about the impact AI is going to have on labor generally. Even jobs that we've sort of long considered almost the most high-skilled or the most creative jobs, from software engineers to actors, music artists, story writers, doctors, across the planet, really. People are becoming aware that AI is going to change the work we do, and they're naturally pretty anxious about what that may mean for their livelihoods. There's a few headlines I've pulled out here around, software engineers will be reading about how, and, very much have adopted these tools already, but they'll be reading about how, 80% of code will be written by AI over the next 5 years. Or you have clones of music artists who are sort of producing music that, to fans of those artists sounds like legitimately great music, which is going to be really, going to be a real shift for those folks. You've got doctors finding that AI is better than them at recognizing cancers in an X-ray. That's actually been true for a number of years. And folks using ChatGPT for their writing or other tools as well for their writing. And then recently with the launch of OpenAI's Sora model, the ability to actually create moving pictures, so films or short films, at least for now, using AI has just gone to the next level. So all of these very creative jobs suddenly feel under threat almost, or at least prone to disruption. But it's not just journalists and experts. It seems everyone's got an opinion, and you sort of can't get away from it right now. And I'm sensing especially there's a lot of doom mongering. There's a lot of people, talking about all the negative consequences when really we're just here trying to figure out how to do our jobs better. But everyone's talking about how this is sort of the end of times. Now, I can't pretend to predict the future for exactly what all of those jobs will look like, and even predict the future for what the recruiting job will look like in complete detail. But what I can say with a very high level of certainty is that for every technological leap forward we've ever experienced as a species, it's resulted in two things. One is more output for less effort. That is what technology is. If you work in technology as we do, or if you're leveraging technology, you're essentially trying to get more output for less effort. And that's what this is going to enable us to achieve. And secondly, it's always resulted in better, safer, higher paying jobs as well. That is what we're seeking in life. And that's what we build technology for. Now, I can also say that some people will get left behind or did get left behind during previous revolutions that have occurred, and that fortune really favored those that were sort of brave enough to adapt quickly to this new normal. So it's not a case that there's no collateral damage. I don't want to make that point. I don't want to I think that's a naive point of view, but it certainly does represent an opportunity to move forward as well. So the crux of what I'm trying to sort of get across is for recruiters, AI should not be seen as a threat. but as an opportunity to higher impact, higher leverage work, or what I could say is spend more time on the higher impact, higher leverage work that is already part of their jobs, but you don't get to spend enough time on. Work that involves more of the tasks that we love, less of the ones that we hate, where actually human interactions are king and the focus of our work, and the robotic admin is delegated to the robots, and where the processes we lead and the decisions we're essentially responsible for or chaperoning are awash with insights and collaboration. So yeah, AI will save recruitment. It's in fact my belief that AI will far from being a threat to recruitment, AI will save recruitment. And that's for a really sort of fundamental reason. The reason I believe recruitment is better placed than 95% of other professions to thrive during this revolution is a really simple one, which is at its core, recruiting is the most human-centric function within any organization. It's a function where the nuanced, synchronous conversations with human beings, be they candidates or the hiring managers you're working with, and your judgments about those conversations, your ability to influence or persuade during those conversations, those are going to be some of the last things that get handed over to AI. It's actually everything else we'll be able to get rid of. So if you're someone, probably not on this call, but if you're someone whose job is, moving things around on a screen or entering data into a system, those are the things that are very prone to be quite fundamentally disrupted. But actually in recruiting's case, I think it's the opposite. I think it's going to be taking away the things we never really loved doing and enabling us to focus on the things we're uniquely able to thrive and perfect. So really, if I was going to summarize it in a sentence or two, for recruiters, what AI is going to lead to a future of is a world where we have less drudgery and more time in our zone of genius, and less guesswork in our decision-making, and more informed action. That's the opportunity. I think this is a pretty good framework to, again, think about over the next, order of years, is to think, where can I reduce the drudgery within my recruiting team or even within your personal day-to-day? And where can I reduce the guesswork? Because those are the two things that AI is going to be really well placed to help you with. And I obviously have some perspectives around particular ways to help with that, but you'll have much more insights around the terrain at your business and in your day-to-day to think about where that might be relevant. But for the rest of this talk and what we go through now, I really want to focus on one thing, which is saving us from drudgery. So less drudgery, more time spent in the zone of genius. Let me just show you what I mean real quick through this example. And Krista, if you could let me know if you can hear this when it starts up, please.
Hi, Jim. I'm really excited to be interviewing for your company today. Oh, and I just want to say how appreciative I am of this opportunity. I can kick off by giving a bit of an introduction about my last work experience and how I ended up applying. When I saw the role, I thought that my background aligned well with the experiences and I also read up on your founding. I've been working at a big company for the past few years, so I'm excited about the opportunity to work with.
Okay, I need some kind of a hint now.
Oh, Jim, sorry. Jim, can you hear me?
Oh, come on! Oh,
Jim? Are you even there?
this is because something people like it.
Jim?
Yes, to all.
I guess the interview's done.
Yeah, there you go. Now everybody's happy.
I bet Jim has never heard of Metaview, an app that writes AI-generated interview notes for you. That way, he would have saved all that typing, and he would have actually heard what I was saying.
Ladies and gentlemen, this just in.
Hi.
So yeah, you folks get the idea. Hope that resonated. Essentially what you had there was a situation where Jim could have been anyone, right? It didn't have to be that human being in that context. It could have been a robot, frankly, because there was very little judgment or engagement being applied. And that's exactly the type of thing when we talk about removing these robotic tasks and replacing them, the time spent on more human tasks, that's a great example of what we mean. So I put together a list here of the way we think about sort of maybe some of the more drudgerous things that we've really grinded on as in recruiting for the past however many years, and what that might be replaced by that is actually a higher leverage activity. So I won't read through them in detail because I think sort of they're pretty self-explanatory, but just to bring it to life, in the future, we're going to spend less time, scouring the internet for profiles of candidates, and more time truly understanding the hiring manager's needs, or in many cases, actually helping them understand their needs. How many times do you sort of, or in your career as a frontline recruiter, did you sort of reluctantly go sourcing based on what the hiring manager said they wanted, when you sort of know that's not going to happen, but you've got to show them the profiles and interview them just so that they can get over the hump of realizing that. You can sort of flip that round, and finding the profiles is going to be, frankly, a commodity. It's going to take seconds. Really, your job is going to be coaching that hiring manager, which is an incredibly high leverage thing to do. Less time spent on reviewing irrelevant applicants. So, the deluge of, especially nowadays, the applications you get through, and more time spent actually meeting with and getting to know the most relevant candidates. Less time spent scheduling and candidates and interviewers and making sure calendars align, and more time preparing those candidates and interviewers so they have as high, as impactful and as insightful interactions as possible. Less time spent on making superficial connections with many candidates, and more time creating deep connections with a few candidates, maybe in the particular industry that you've decided to specialize in. Less time spent transcribing and then writing up notes and reformatting, restructuring and cleaning, polishing your notes, and more time actually engaging with what candidates are saying and getting to know them, influencing them, motivating them, whatever it might be. And then finally, less time corralling and nagging interviewers, maybe for some feedback or, some help putting the job description together, whatever it might be, and much more time advising those interviewers and HMs. We sort of think about it in a bimodal way. And for me, drudgery, i.e. the stuff that's we're going to do less and less of, is the sort of the bit between planning and performing. So if you think about how things are now, in a lot of the cases, especially if you're a full stack recruiter, you might spend like a little bit of time thinking about your recruiting strategy, a little bit of time actually performing it, and a whole bunch of time on this drudgery in the middle, which is like finding candidates, scheduling candidates, trying to get an understanding of what the HM is looking for. And all of those sort of things. And we end up spending the majority of time actually in that drudgery. And this sort of graph on the left-hand side is what demonstrates that. We spend very little time on the planning and the performing, and we spend more time on the drudgery. This might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think it's a big exaggeration. The shift that we see occurring is the sort of the inverse of that, where actually you spend much more time on your planning, getting your strategy right, your recruiting strategy, much more time on your performing, so actually doing the differentiated high leverage work of recruiting, and as little time as possible on the drudgery. I think this actually relates to this increased specialization you see in recruiting as well, where you see folks either in leadership positions or maybe even recruiting ops positions, as that's getting more and more prevalent. Recruiter enablement is emerging as a theme, sort of playing in this section. And then you have these sort of really high leverage folks who have great networks and really understand candidates and how to get the best out of hiring managers, who spend their time in this performing sort of part of the day, as it were. But theory sucks. So why don't we just jump in and I show you what I mean by, as an example of AI saving recruitment. I'm just going to change my share real quick and jump into Metaview now. So as you sort of picked up from the video with Jim Carey, Metaview is very focused on being an AI assistant for the interview process. So we're very focused on, I guess, the part of the recruiting process that up to now has been least affected by technology, which is the conversations you have with candidates. And in fact, what we believe is the fact that the technology hasn't really been part of these conversations before has been one of the reasons they've been quite robotic in the past, because it's been your job as the recruiter to extract data from those conversations while also trying to talk with them, which is very, very hard. If even during this presentation, my job was to also sort of extract the information I'm getting and the signals I'm getting, I would do a worse job in the presentation. And it's exactly the same thing when you're running an interview and you're expected to do both of these jobs. So what you're seeing on your screen now is the notes from an interview that I ran earlier in the week. I didn't take any notes during that call. Metaview did that for me. Metaview pulled out the questions that I asked, bullet point summarized the candidate's answer, pulled out the question, bullet point summarize the candidate's answer. So where I come to Metaview is after a day of many screens. I might have 5 to 6 calls in the day. I still need to do some work on those calls, right? I either need to decide to put that candidate through, or maybe send them a note to let them know we're not going to progress. And I want to give them a bit of, I want to show the sort of the requisite respect, maybe give them a little bit of a personalized feedback on that as well. I come to the end of the day, all of those candidates have jumbled into one. Historically, I'd look at my hand typed notes and really not be able to make heads nor tails of it. Whereas with my notes here, they're concise yet thorough and highly accurate, and I didn't have to touch my keyboard. I can read through the notes here. I can use each section to jump to a moment in the underlying interview and then play back the interview itself if I'd like, and actually see those moments. I can tell Metaview actually to sort of merge certain sections, like actually I prefer these notes to be joined, so I drag and drop, and Metaview will rewrite those notes for me. And again, this was all created totally automatically. I didn't have to tell Metaview what I was going to ask. It's like inviting a personal assistant to your call, asking them to take your notes for you. They'll do a pretty good job because they understand that context. Now, this is a really great start for, again, reducing the sort of the drudgery of taking notes during calls. But of course, a lot of the time, after when I want to do something with this candidate, I don't want to just pass on my sort of linearly written out notes of everything we discussed. I want to synthesize the most important information for the hiring process, and also, of course, add some judgment. So let's imagine I have a hiring manager who I'm working with on this call. Historically, what I'd do is I'd maybe spend 20 or 30 minutes, maybe at the end of the day, maybe in pajama time before I go to bed, so I don't have to do it in, so I don't have to wake up to it and do it in the next morning, rewriting those notes in a format that makes sense for them. In this case, I'm just going to ask Metaview to do that for me. What I've done here is I've instructed Metaview, I've given Metaview a set of instructions. Every time I do an interview, please write me my notes in a certain way, in a certain format. And I'm going to tell Metaview to now apply that template. And what Metaview does is in just a few seconds, it goes through the whole interview and rewrites the notes, anchoring the information around the topics that I told it were most important. So for example, summarizing the high-level experience of the candidate, some example projects, how they deal with conflict and collaboration, irrespective of, it's not just summarizing how the conversation went, it has a semantic understanding of the topics and finds the context that relate to each of those topics for me. Now, in this case, I actually might think, well, this is a bit too much information for the hiring manager. I'm going to ask Metaview to shorten it up a bit, make it a bit more concise. I can do that right here. And Metaview will just shorten that up for me. And it'll take a few seconds to write that out for me. But the idea here is now I've gone from a sort of a corpus of this is everything we discussed, still pretty summarized, but sort of it's pretty much everything we discussed, to here are the things that you told me you cared about for this role written up for you. Now, a lot of the time, what I'll do is I'll actually pass that on to the hiring manager, say, hey, this is a great candidate. I think we should find some time to meet with them ASAP. So, let's go ahead and do that. And to do that, I might also want to give a very high level summary of the candidate. And this is another great example of how human and AI can work really well together. Now, me as the person who understands the hiring manager and understands the candidate, I know what are the important 2 or 3 topics, the most important 2 or 3 topics to get the hiring manager excited about this candidate. Metaview or AI does not, because they've never spoken to that hiring manager and they haven't seen or heard the feedback that hiring manager has given on every other candidate so far. So what I'm going to do is tell Metaview which topics, again, are most important to create a 1-paragraph executive summary about this candidate that reflects what I think is most important about them. So I'm going to tell Metaview to summarize their career overview, their future goals, the technologies they're familiar with, and their compensation expectations. And I'm going to say, go ahead and generate that TLDR. And Metaview, again, will just take a few seconds. And instead of me spending, again, maybe 5-10 minutes trying to sort of write this perfectly worded executive summary, Metaview is going to do that bit for me. It didn't decide the content, but it is just doing the sort of more predictable, less differentiated task of just writing that out for me. So yeah, the candidate began their career as a mobile developer at a small company. They've set their compensation expectations at this level. Over the next 5 years, the candidate aims, and so on and so on. So again, this really naturally worded summary that Metaview has made for me that I can either push into my ATS or in many cases, copy down, send to the hiring manager via Slack or email and say, hey, let's get this person in for a hiring manager screening. So if you think about one thing I should also say, just for awareness, is you can also push this directly into your scorecard. So it would hook it up to your ATS, and Metaview will essentially suggest content that should go into each of your scorecard fields within your applicant tracking system, which saves your hiring managers mainly a bunch of time actually as well. So if you think about what we've seen so far, we've really focused on, well, enable me to be more human during a call because I can focus on the candidate, save me time after the call. There's also this problem that often sucks about recruiting, which is I can't always remember everything that was said. And frankly, my interviewers and hiring managers can't remember either. And that's where the assistant is incredibly helpful. Let's say I want to put this candidate through. Hiring manager pushes back to me, hey, yeah, great, but do they have any machine learning experience? I can't remember if we spoke about that, particularly because I spoke to 10 candidates yesterday. So I'm just going to ask Metaview. So I just use natural language to ask the question. Metaview understands the context of the question and goes through the interview and finds me evidence to support whether they do or don't have this experience. In this case, they do. They worked on a project at Google. And what's really amazing is it includes a reference. So this sort of lets me know what they said that enabled our AI to derive this insight. And I can go from here to jump to that section of the interview in order to either play that back or maybe even just share this particular section with them. So it just empowers me to give my hiring manager a much better view of the candidate they're either due to speak to, or even more importantly, when it does get to decision time at the end of the funnel, I can play a much more impactful role in helping people get to the right decision, because all these cases where we see people deciding based on, you know, memory or feeling, I can make sure it's grounded in truth. So a really great way to help with that too. Let me just,
I have one question to interject here from the chat, which I think is good at this point. Did you feed the candidate's resume to Metaview, or can you supplement the summary with it?
Did not feed the candidate's resume. Right now, you don't supplement with the resume. We still sort of treat almost the ATS as the home of those things. But we're always thinking about what additional resources to pull in. The way we think about it right now, this is like a little bit maybe more focused on our product strategy than what folks might be interested in. But we really think that conversations are by far the biggest data resource that is completely underutilized. So every time we think about what can we do next, we just get drawn to so many things that relate to the conversation. And I think we find with a lot of our customers as well, that actually there's a ton of insight in the conversation that is far richer than, let's say, the resume or the job description or whatever it might be. And so we tend to focus most of our energy there. But of course, our customers will often bring up resumes alongside the interview notes and so on.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Let's jump back to the presentation. One thing I actually maybe didn't sort of say clearly enough there was, I think one of the things that we hear a ton of great feedback around. Of course, there's the sort of the generation of rapport with the candidate, but increasingly the relationship that recruiters have with hiring managers is also one that ends up getting massively improved and put on a pedestal. And actually for us, that's really important because, you know, I mentioned we started Metaview, 5 years ago now. We didn't start it as recruiters. We started it as hiring managers. I was at Uber at a time when Uber was growing incredibly fast. I was on the product team. My co-founder was at Palantir at a time they were growing incredibly fast. He was on the engineering team. And really our exposure to recruiting was through the interview process and through obviously that part of the sort of the bottom of the funnel, you can think of it. And, much as that was has been a real we've learned a lot of hard lessons along the way as we've got, you know, as we built this product for the recruiting industry and got to know lots of recruiters and realized all the things we didn't know. There's also some advantages that imparts on us, because you realize we sort of really understand the vitality of that relationship, and actually removing a lot of this drudgery enables recruiters to focus on that relationship more, which we're seeing is the biggest and best way to really improve the effectiveness of the hiring process fundamentally. So this is clearly a huge time saver. That's certainly what we set out for. Hopefully we can all agree on that. I know there's a few customers on the session, so they can hopefully vouch for that if it comes up. But it does sort of beg the question: if we save time, does that not mean we're going to do ourselves out of a job? Are we going to reduce the overall demand for recruiters if it's something we can do so quickly now? And the short answer, in my opinion, is no. So this is a classic example of what's called a Jevons paradox. A Jevons paradox is the phenomenon where the increased efficiency of a resource leads to an overall increase in its consumption rather than reducing it. So intuitively, what you might think is, if you make something more efficient, i.e. it takes less time to do something, overall you'll use less of that thing because it's more efficient now. But that's just not what happens. We now need less electricity to light a light bulb, but electricity usage has gone up. Or in this example on the screen, people are using more fuel than ever, despite massive gains in fuel efficiency. And frankly, even despite as other fuel sources come along, it's still the case that there's more and more driving because it's more efficient, or people are driving further because it's more efficient. So in a recruiter's world, what you might expect the people on the balcony to be saying is, these recruiters are so efficient, I'll hire one rather than try to do it myself. They're much more likely to get a good result. They're much more expert in how to use these tools and how to engage with candidates, that they'll actually get me the great candidate I need, rather than trying to do it sort of on the side. Or, these recruiters are so efficient that they do so much more for me now than just get bums in seats. And they actually bring tons more value. That's the sort of the analogy for recruiting. And I guess what I would say is that's the world that you are striving to create. So I hope at very least that's given you some inspiration about how to think about recruiting. If you master and apply powerful tools like these across your recruiting process, just think how much more quickly you will do a better job. And that, at the end of the day, is what leverage is about. It's about doing things quicker and more effectively at the same time. And if you do those things, recruiters, the people that work in the industry will be better value for money, which is a sort of a harsh way to think about things. But of course, that is the bottom line for how AI is going to impact industry. Is people are going to think, where do I get my value for money? Mastering these tools is going to help you be better value for money. One thing is for sure, though, and take Metaview out of the equation here. This is, whether this was, something I was so deeply passionate about or not. One thing that's really clear for me strategically is that avoidance is not the winning strategy. So I guess the thing I'm really beating the fist on the table for here is if you think about your day to day, or if you think about your team and the work they're doing day to day, and you think there's a bunch of it that is essentially being done on autopilot, then an autopilot is going to start to do that soon. And what you really want to do is spend more time on critical thinking, influencing, engaging with other human beings, are really the things where you want to be spending your time. Which, again, just to loop back around to why this is such a great thing for recruiting, those are so central to recruiting. So it's really going to give everyone the ability to be great at the things that really separate the great recruiters from the good, rather than spend so much time on the drudgery. You should get started on Metaview. We don't have to talk about that right now, but you should check it out.
I agree 100%. And I have to admit, I have been using Metaview for a good few weeks now, and I learned actually quite a bit from your demo. So I'm excited to go into my next few interviews, and the merging of the questions. Loved that. The TLDR, I mean, all of it. So really, really happy to see all of that. And that paradox that you talked about, love that too. I think that's it rings true in so many innovations over time. And so why wouldn't it be the same with this, right? So I have a few questions that I'd love to find out from you. So, you've chosen to start by solving the recruiting note-taking pain point with your AI. And I think you maybe mentioned this a little bit in your presentation, but if there's anything you wanted to add to it to go a little bit deeper, why did you start there? Like, why did you start with note-taking as, the first problem that you wanted to solve?
Yeah, we didn't actually start specifically with note-taking. We really started, and it ends up being the same thing. We actually really started with data extraction. So I just saw a question come through on the chat as well around, given our backgrounds, why did we start here? It sort of ends up being the same question. So hopefully that will be covered too. We were hiring managers at high growth companies. We were, especially my co-founder was very diligent about how he thought about hiring. And despite maybe a lot of the things that could sometimes feel quite laborious and low leverage, he and hopefully I were always pretty disciplined in that we understood this is the most high leverage thing we're doing. If I think about my time at Uber now, there's some people who are responsible for hiring who are still there in very senior positions doing great work. So had far more impact on that company than I did. So sort of academically, we had this understanding, despite how it feels, this is a really high leverage activity, but it just didn't match up with the day-to-day of when you were actually doing it. It just felt like, you were going into debriefs and, well, I disagreed with that person yesterday, so I can't disagree with them on this candidate again today. It was all these other things that were coming into the mix around how I would contribute to a hiring decision, or I don't really think that person did a great job in that interview, but I have no idea if they did or not. So I'm going to have to, go with what they say, and they thought the candidate was no good. This type of stuff. So what that led to was a fundamental sort of phrase that we started the company based on, which is, if we want to make it so that we drastically reduce the number of bad hiring decisions, it's really hard to believe we'll do that if we don't know what's happening in the interviews, because that's always going to be a big sort of black box that we won't understand. So what we really started to do when we started the company, the idea was, can we extract meaningful data from interviews, from hiring conversations? Now, it turns out we actually took a very long time to realize this, that the current data extractor was us. It was the human beings. And so what we sort of learned over time was actually the thing we really want to do is empower the people that are doing running those conversations right now, so that the data extraction is far better. So now I'm using data extraction, and you can change that for note taking, because that's what it is. Now, the really cool thing about starting to maybe flip the mental model from, much as we talk about Metaview as a note taker, because it's and we encourage actually customers, if they're rolling it out to their companies, to talk about it as such as well. Because it is replacing the job of note taking, but B, it's obviously like, it's much easier to understand. But the real way to think about it is data extraction. You are now employing an AI to extract data from your conversations. That means you get far more of it. That means it's far more accurate. It means it's far more queryable and interrogatable. It means you can see it. And that's really what the company, increasingly what you'll see is the ability to sort of really leverage AI is based on this high quality data you're getting from this unstructured data source, which is the conversations you're running. So yeah, I don't know. So maybe now when I'm hearing myself say it out loud, it sounds like a bit of a circuitous answer to the question and the thing, but that's how it went down.
Yeah, great. And I see Andy Sterling, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is amazing. So I think I'm one of the few people that actually like taking notes while I'm talking to candidates. But what I saw from your demo is that could be really wonderful in supplementing of the things that I miss. Are you able to work with, like, I use HubSpot. So is there a way to have those work together so then it's your notes from Meta would go in with mine?
Yeah.
Can they merge together and then be searchable for me?
Yeah. Do you take your notes directly in HubSpot currently?
Mm-hmm.
So during the call, you're on HubSpot typing the notes?
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, because we're very recruiting focused, we don't have an active integration with HubSpot. But if you're sort of using maybe one of the more the ATS products, the sort of built for purpose ATS products, then yes, the integration is very tight. And totally, we encourage. What we encourage is a change to note taking. Mm-hmm. Logging what questions you asked, what answer you got, and the information from those answers is not something you should have to do anymore. and you can focus more of your note-taking almost energy on noting down your inferences or the implications of what was said, your judgments, maybe noting down the question you need to ask next, because you know, all that type of stuff, of course, that's still useful to jog the memory, but also being responsible for, you know, trying to keep up when if they're a fast talker, you know, talking a million miles an hour with what they said is the job that goes away. We do speak to some recruiters who find that they synthesize information better by taking notes. And I think there is a degree of, there's like a habit aspect to this, you know, you might also just be in the habit of it, and therefore it feels a little bit awkward when you're not doing that anymore. But what we tend to find is over time, the trust that is built up in the AI's ability to pull out the most important information at least changes your ability to engage, even if you still want to take your own notes, just because you know you don't have to furiously, you know, try and keep up with what they're saying.
Yeah. So
And
is there,
just to be clear, you can edit your notes within Metaview and then push them to your ATS as well. So not with HubSpot, but with others.
okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Siadhal, I was just reflecting, and Deborah, I see your hand up. Hi, Deborah. I'll get to you in just one second. Totally reflecting on what you were saying about the habit of it. Like the first week I was using Metaview, I was like fiercely taking notes. I'm like, but what if it doesn't catch all of this? What if it does, you know? And then the second week I was like, okay, I'm like taking a little bit of notes. And then by the third week I was like, oh, this is great. Like I can just sit back and actually engage with the candidate. So couldn't agree more about the trust. Like it takes a few weeks to get that trust in the product, but I was able to do it in a few weeks. So Deborah, hi.
A long time. Yeah, great information. I appreciate the presentation. So I also enjoy taking notes, and I take really good notes because I've always had those challenging type of hiring managers that have a lot of questions. I've also worked with hiring managers that don't read the notes. So it's really important as the recruiter that I'm gathering as much information so that when I'm sitting in a debrief meeting, I'm able to provide and answer questions and also promote my candidate that I've set before the hiring manager and the team. So I think it's a great tool. I'd be willing to use it, and I'm hoping that moving forward with my next opportunity that I'll be able to do that. I do have a question. With AI, what happens with the ATS system? Does it work together or does it eventually fade out? They're very expensive. I rely on them, but you know, we do reporting, we get all of our analytics and everything from that. So what happens with the ATS systems as we move forward with the AI?
Yeah, so I think that let's focus on the short term. I think long term, you know, I hope that Metaview looks very different even in a few years, right? Because the foundational technology is we are really sort of riding a tidal wave of change right now, and things will change. But if you think about, you know, assuming sort of generally sort of there's not too much of a shift, I think ATS play an incredibly important role. They're, for all of our customers, they're still the backbone of their recruiting process, and Metaview is complementary. Now, what I believe, again, is actually that conversations are have the most important data, and you know, Metaview tends to be the best place to go to review and interrogate and ingest that data. So it works alongside them, but of course with certain points where it hooks in. You know, for example, for filling scorecards, we can help folks with that, but the scorecard still lives in the ATS, and that's still the backbone. And all of the things you mentioned around reporting and scheduling and all of these things, they're not really things that those are pretty well solved by ATSs, and so therefore not really things that we think a ton about. We really think about, just to take one step back, there's a bunch of, you know, thinking and conjecture going on about where's AI going to affect things. And one of the veins that a lot of, you know, thinkers in the space will say that AI is going to really heavily impact is enabling people to make more use of unstructured data. So ATS is full of structured data. It tells you this is a structure, put your information in this way, in this way, in this way. And that's like one sort of type of data that can be really useful. Conversations are a great example of unstructured data. So I think of ATS as this sort of like very structured system for you running processes and all really important stuff, and very important things for us to play really nicely with. And we, you know, we're official partners with many of, you know, with all of the main ATSs. But Metaview is going to be or let's actually say AI is going to have more of an impact on unstructured data, things that we previously haven't been able to wrangle. And that's what we're going to focus on. And there'll be a whole bunch of things that fall into that bucket. But conversations are by far the biggest one.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I see another question in the chat. Do you port over the interview prep, notes, questions to ask, etc. tab from Greenhouse into the interviewer view, or is it just coming from the Greenhouse scorecard Q&A template?
So it's the latter. It's just we just pull in the scorecard template at this point. In terms of actually hosting your interview scripts, they still live wherever they live right now. Some of these things are like very deliberate product decisions. We think that's the best place for them to be because the ATS has other benefits that we're not planning to have, and therefore it should live there. In other cases, it might just be a prioritization thing, like we haven't done it yet. And obviously, sessions like this plus feedback we get from customers determines what we think we should maybe build next.
Yeah, great. I have a couple more here. So you mentioned in the very beginning of your presentation that Metaview is the co-pilot of the recruiter. So in addition to data extraction, i.e. note-taking, are there any other, directions that you're going to go in the recruiting process, or, what's on the horizon for the future of the product?
Yeah. So the relationship with the hiring manager, and just be clear, just to make sure we're on the same page, we think of Copilot it is in many ways like a personal assistant for the recruiter, but we really think of it as more of a Copilot for the process as a whole. So there's, hiring is a team sport. Obviously, recruiters are massively dependent on hiring managers, working well with hiring managers, and hiring managers who are able to identify what they need and, get that out of candidates, and interviewing teams sort of following on and making sure they get the information they need to. So we think of it as a co-pilot for the whole process. And so that's really where a lot of the focus goes now. We've really, I would say, built up our reputation in the last year by really focusing on recruiters and making their lives easier. There's some things there's a lot we'll continue to do there to improve the current products, but also to help with those next steps, whether that's, writing out the email, post that interview either to the hiring manager or to the candidate themselves, or at the end of the process. But there'll also be a bunch we do that focuses more on hiring managers and interviewers and helping them find the information that they need. One thing that we've just launched that we're really excited about and we're continuing to work on, I would say for the next couple of months, just because it's such a big change, is what we call AI filters. AI filters essentially enable you to leverage our AI to find any conversation you want based on the content of the conversation. So, and there's like a really long tail of use cases here, be it to assist hiring managers or to assist recruiters. So if you think about it on the recruiter side, let's imagine, you've got a new rec and it's for a new office you're starting in a new location, and you've got hundreds of conversations you've had with potential candidates on Metaview. But of course, you don't know which one of them mentioned, hey, I'd be open to relocation. And you can actually ask Metaview, show me all the candidates who said they'd be open to relocation. So basically, querying your database of candidates based on things that they said to help you with your sourcing can just help you, cut out two sides of that triangle and just get straight to point A.
Love that.
Yeah, or whether it's putting together training interviews based on certain questions being asked during the interview that you want to be included in your training pack. There's just a long tail of ways. So it really opens up a ton of possibilities. And actually the way that we launched the feature was quite, it's almost like quite use case agnostic, because we want to see what people end up using it for and then react to that and the rails around it. But a lot of it essentially is going to come down to harnessing the data in the conversations, even if you didn't sort of extract it yourself. But the fact is it's still there and we have it so you can use it.
Yeah, I mean, how many times are you like, oh, that one candidate that we talked about skiing in the Alps, and you can never find that one candidate ever again. So that's great. Thank you. And then what about, like, say you're a recruiter or maybe a recruiting leader out there who is really interested and excited about new technology, wants to be using AI in their workflow, but really facing resistance and challenges from, the organization in either, implementation. Do you have any advice for anyone out there that might be in a similar situation?
Yeah, I think there is a portion which is like, sometimes you just got to fight the good fight. And there's obviously like things that about the human beings in your company that it would be silly of me to sort of try and imagine that I understand better. But I would say the thing that we can control, and therefore the thing that I think makes sense for potential buyers to consider, is this AI revolution is also a really good opportunity for sort of like snake oil salespeople, right? Because you can put something in a deck and say it's going to work like this, and not only will you not be able to try it out until you purchase the thing and make, really put a lot of your credibility on the line to buy the thing, but secondly, they might not even know if it's effective because they haven't got enough users through the product. And these are all completely new, novel features. These are like new problems, or they're existing problems. We just didn't know they were we just didn't know they were solvable. So you've never sort of got them on your stack rank of these are the things that I want to solve this quarter or this half year. And so we really encourage, essentially, take baby steps. Like, make sure you play, because play is like the best way to learn with these tools, but take baby steps. Whether that means a very small deployment initially that doesn't sort of touch the sides of like budget conversations internally, or whether that's even just doing it internally on maybe your internal mobility hiring or whatever it might be, there's usually a sort of a pretty smart way that you can build up your personal conviction of this. Because what you probably don't want to do as a recruiting leader is try and convince someone about the importance of AI. Really, that's going to be a company thing. What you want to do is convince people about the importance or the impact that a certain product or technology can have on your ability to achieve the goals that the whole business cares about. In this case, hiring great people, hiring them quicker, maybe maintaining a smaller team while you do it because everyone's so efficient. And so you really want to to build up the conviction, you really want to play with the products. So I think you'll find a lot of the best AI products are encouraging free trials and essentially try before you buy. And that's almost like a self-fulfilling thing, because when you have that approach, what we find is when you get people trying out the product for free, you also get more feedback, as opposed to if you go through a very long sales process, we're both sort of like hoping this is going to be effective. And then we realize, oh, damn, that didn't work the way that we intended it to. And that's not the way we should build this product. And we've just wasted 3 or 6 months building it. So basically, long way of saying, play with things. I do think experimentation is part of the job right now for a recruiting leader with this new sort of influx of technology. But the thing that you have to be the expert on is not the AI. The thing you have to be expert on is how does this impact our ability to land great talent? And there, obviously, no one in your company, no one on the planet is a better place to understand that. You understand that better than I do, of course, as well. So that's the thing I would really remain loyal to, but make sure you're playing.
Yeah, really, really great points. Well, thank you. Thank you again. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can wrap it up here, but really, really wanted to just say thank you, and we appreciate your time, Siadhal. You're an inspiration for what you're doing for the recruiting community, saving us a ton of time, and selfishly, I'm just a big fan. So please feel free to connect with Siadhal, and we're going to be sending out a recording of this. If you missed any of it, we're also going to be sending out a free extended trial of Metaview, so be on the lookout for that in the email. Also, just a quick update for Talent Collective. We have some virtual events coming up in May and April. Topics are total compensation, recruiting assessments to predict job performance, women's pay equity, and more. So keep an eye on our social pages as well. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us today.
Thanks, folks. Thanks so much.